Hello friend, welcome to Science for Sleep. Tonight, we're going to spend some time with flowers. Not just as pretty things in gardens or bouquets on tables, but as living parts of the world with their own long story. A story shaped by sunlight, insects, weather, time, and the quiet needs of plants trying to continue their lives. Flowers can seem simple at first. You see them in parks, beside roads, in yards, at weddings, at events, and in little glass jars on kitchen counters. They are so common that it can be easy to stop noticing them. And yet the closer you look, the more surprising they become. Before we go further, if you enjoy slow, calming science like this, you can subscribe and join us for more peaceful journeys through the natural world. A flower is one of the most familiar things on Earth. Even a child can recognize one. But that does not mean it is ordinary. In fact, flowers belong to one of the most successful groups of living things on the planet. The plants that make them, called flowering plants, are found almost everywhere. They grow in forests, deserts, wetlands, mountains, meadows, and city sidewalks. They appear in warm climates and cold ones. Some are tiny enough to miss unless you kneel down. Others are wide, heavy, and impossible to ignore. What makes flowers so special is that they seem to live in two worlds at once. In one world, they are scientific structures. They are part of how plants reproduce. They help plants make seeds. They attract pollinators. They signal through color, scent, shape, and timing. They are practical, busy, and deeply connected to survival. In the other world, they belong to human feeling. People bring flowers to someone they love. They place them beside hospital beds. They carry them at weddings. They leave them at graves. They grow them in memory of parents, grandparents, and old homes. A flower can mean joy, apology, hope, grief, tenderness, or nothing more complicated than a quiet wish to make a room feel alive. That may be one reason flowers have such a gentle power over us. They are useful to the plant, but they do not feel cold or mechanical. They feel soft, brief, and almost personal. A flower opens, brightens the world for a while, and then fades. There is something calming in that rhythm, something peaceful in the fact that beauty can arrive without noise, do its work quietly, and then pass on. And flowers really do live by timing. Some open in the morning and close by evening. Some bloom only for a few days each year. Some wait for a certain season, a certain temperature, or a certain kind of rain. Some bloom in daylight, while others open at night and release their scent into the dark. Even when we are not paying attention, flowers are following clocks of light and warmth and life all around them. There is also something wonderfully strange about how much effort plants put into flowers. They grow petals in bright colors. They release sweet scents into the air. They make nectar for insects, birds, or bats. Some even create patterns that humans cannot see, patterns visible only to pollinators. What looks to us like beauty often has a job to do. It is part invitation, part signal, part strategy. Still, knowing that does not take away the magic. If anything, it adds to it. A flower does not become less beautiful when we learn what it is doing. It becomes more impressive. What seemed like decoration turns out to be purpose. What seemed quiet turns out to be full of communication. What seemed delicate turns out to be part of one of the great success stories in the history of life on land. Tonight, we'll move slowly through that story. We'll look at what flowers are, how they work, how they evolved, and how they became tied to human memory, culture, art, and emotion. We'll spend time with their colors, their scents, their shapes, and their hidden designs. We'll wander through gardens, old civilizations, wild landscapes, and the silent partnerships flowers formed with the creatures that visit them. And before any of that, it helps to stay with one simple thought. Long before people understood the biology of flowers, they were already drawn to them. They stopped for them, picked them, grew them, painted them, offered them, remembered people through them. So perhaps the best place to begin is not with botany, but with attention itself. Why have human beings, across so many places and so much time, felt the need to pause for flowers at all? Well, before people understood how flowers worked, they were already paying attention to them. That happened in many different places, across many different times, and for many different reasons. Flowers were noticed before they were explained. They were loved before they were studied. People picked them, planted them, wore them, offered them, painted them, and carried them home. Even without modern science, human beings understood something simple and immediate about flowers. They stood out. Part of that comes from the way flowers appear in the landscape. A tree trunk can be beautiful, but it does not usually ask for attention in the same way. Grass can be soft and peaceful, but it often blends together. A flower is different. It rises out of green surroundings with a sudden shape, a burst of color, a pattern, a scent. It feels almost like a signal. Even in a quiet field, the eye moves toward it. That alone may help explain why flowers have always mattered to people. Human attention is often drawn to contrast. We notice things that are bright against dull backgrounds, brief against long stretches of sameness, delicate against roughness, softness against stone. A flower can hold all of that at once. It can seem small and fragile, but also vivid and impossible to miss. Their short lives may also be part of their power. Many flowers do not stay open for very long. Some last only days. Some bloom for a season and vanish again. Some appear suddenly in spring, as if they had been waiting all winter for the exact right moment. That briefness gives flowers a special feeling. They are not just beautiful, they are passing. And people often feel deeply moved by things that will not last. That may be one reason flowers became tied to so many important human moments. They fit naturally into celebrations because they feel vivid and alive. They fit naturally into grief because they also remind us how temporary life can be. A flower can brighten a wedding table, but it can also rest quietly beside a gravestone. It can celebrate arrival, love, healing, apology, memory, or farewell. Few things in nature move so easily between joy and sadness. Scent plays a role too. For many people, flowers are not remembered first by shape or even by color, but by smell. A rose, a lilac, a lavender plant, jasmine on warm air, fresh cut flowers in a house, even the faint green smell of stems in water. Scent often connects strongly to memory. A floral smell can bring back a season, a room, a person, or a moment before the mind has time to explain why. it can feel almost like being pulled backward through time. That deep tie between flowers and memory may help explain why people have placed them so carefully in their lives. Flowers are not only decorations, they often mark emotion. They can say something without speaking. A bouquet left at a door means something. A flower held in the hand at a funeral means something. A pressed flower saved inside an old book means something. Even when no words are attached, flowers often feel like messages. Over time, cultures all around the world built traditions around that feeling. Flowers were woven into clothing. They were placed in hair. They were used in rituals and offerings. They were planted in temple grounds and home gardens. They appeared in celebrations of spring, in religious ceremonies, in art, in poetry, and in medicine. They became part of daily life and part of sacred life too. And flowers did not have to be rare to be meaningful. In fact, part of their power may come from the opposite. They are often close at hand. They grow near homes, along paths, in fields, in ditches, in pots on windowsills. They are ordinary enough to be familiar, but beautiful enough to keep surprising us. That balance is unusual. Many extraordinary things are distant. Flowers are extraordinary in a way that keeps coming near. Even now, in a world full of screens, traffic, and indoor life, people still stop for flowers. They slow down to photograph them. They plant them in gardens and on balconies. They bring them into hospitals and kitchens and quiet corners of homes. Something about them still cuts through distraction. Maybe that is because flowers are never just one thing. They are part color, part scent, part memory, part season. They are alive, but still. Brief, but recurring. Soft, but important. They ask for attention without force. And yet for all the feeling they carry, flowers are not only symbols. Beneath their beauty is structure. Beneath their softness is purpose. The thing that draws human attention so easily is also doing one of the most important jobs a plant can do. Because a flower is not simply an ornament growing on a stem. It is a living structure with a clear purpose. And once we begin to see what that purpose is, the quiet beauty of flowers starts to look even more remarkable. A flower can seem almost like an extra. It is bright, soft, and sometimes fragrant. It catches the eye in a way that leaves and stems usually do not. Because of that, it is easy to think of a flower as a kind of decoration the plant happens to make. But for the plant, the flower is not extra at all. It is one of the most important structures it can produce. At its most basic level, a flower is part of how a flowering plant reproduces. Flowering plants, also called angiosperms, use flowers to make seeds. Those seeds contain the beginning of the next generation. So while a flower may look gentle and still, it is actually part of a very active process. It is a place where pollen is made, where pollen is received, and where new seeds can begin to form. That may sound a little technical at first, but the basic idea is simple. A flower helps bring together the materials needed for plant reproduction. In many flowers, this includes male parts that make pollen and female parts that receive it. Once pollen reaches the right place, the process can continue inside the flower. If all goes well, seeds begin to develop. This means that many of the things we notice first about flowers are tied to that goal. The petals are not there only to look beautiful. Their color can help attract pollinators. Their shape can help guide insects or birds inward. Their scent can drift through the air like an invitation. Nectar, when it is present, acts like a reward. Even the timing of a flower opening can be part of the plan. Some flowers open in daylight when bees are active. Others open at night for moths or bats. So what looks like beauty to us is often function for the plant. That does not make flowers less lovely. In fact, it makes them more impressive. The flower is doing many things at once. It is protecting delicate structures. It is sending signals outward. It is receiving visitors. It is making reproduction possible. All of this happens in a shape that can fit in the palm of a hand. Inside the flower, different parts each play a role. The male parts, called stamens, produce pollen. Pollen contains the plant's male reproductive cells. The female part, often called the pistil, includes the stigma, style, and ovary. The stigma is the part that receives pollen. The style is like a narrow passage leading downward. The ovary, lower in the flower, contains ovules. Those ovules can become seeds after fertilization. Around these inner parts are other structures. Petals often help attract attention. Sepals usually protect the flower while it is still a bud. In some species, nectar is also produced to attract animal visitors. Altogether, the flower is a carefully arranged system, with each part supporting the same larger goal. And that goal is continuation. Plants cannot walk around looking for mates. They cannot chase what they need. So they rely on wind, water, or living creatures to move pollen from one flower to another. The flower is the structure that makes this possible. It is how the plant reaches beyond itself. That is why flowers matter so much in the living world. They are not separate from the life of the plant. They are central to it. Without successful flowers, many plants would not make seeds. Without seeds, there would be no next generation. In some cases, a flower can even change dramatically once its work is done. The petals may wilt and fall. The ovary may begin to swell. What was once a flower may slowly become a fruit or seed pod. So the flower is not always the final form. Often, it is a stage in a longer process. This can make flowers feel a little different when you look at them. A blossom is not only something pretty growing in the garden. It is a living structure at a very important moment in the plant's life. It is a signal, a meeting place, and a beginning. It holds both beauty and purpose in the same shape. And perhaps that is part of why flowers feel so complete to us. They are not random bursts of color. They are solutions shaped over vast stretches of time. They are elegant answers to a difficult problem: how to reproduce while rooted in place. That raises an interesting thought. If flowers are such effective structures, and if they have been so deeply tied to human life for so long, then how far back does that relationship go? Long before people knew what pollen or ovules were, they had already made room for flowers in ritual, art, memory, and belief. So before looking even more closely at the flower itself, it helps to pause and step back into the older human world that noticed flowers long before science explained them. People notice flowers early. They notice their beauty, their scent, their briefness, and the way they seem to carry feeling without speaking. Across ancient cultures, flowers appeared in places that mattered most. They were placed in sacred spaces, woven into celebrations, offered to the dead, and worked into art that was meant to last. In ancient Egypt, flowers were closely tied to both beauty and belief. The lotus was especially important. It appeared in art, in architecture, and in religious imagery. Because the lotus opened in daylight and closed again later, it became linked with ideas of renewal, rebirth, and the daily rising of the sun. Flower shapes were carved into columns. Floral designs appeared in tomb paintings and decorated objects. What grew from the water became part of how people imagined life, order, and return. Ancient Greece and Rome also gave flowers a strong place in culture. Flowers were linked to gods, myths, love, feasts, and changing seasons. Garlands and wreaths were worn during celebrations, ceremonies, and public life. Flower crowns could suggest honor, beauty, joy, or connection to a god or festival. In stories, flowers were often given magical or emotional meaning. A bloom might explain a transformation, mark a death, or symbolize desire and loss. Even when the stories were not scientific, they show how closely people were already watching the plant world. In ancient India, flowers became deeply connected with ritual, devotion, and symbolism. They were offered in temples, used in ceremonies, and associated with purity, beauty, and divine presence. The lotus again held special importance, often symbolizing spiritual awakening, balance, and sacred beauty. Floral garlands were used to honor guests, gods, and important moments. Flowers also appeared in poetry and visual art, where they carried both sensory richness and emotional meaning. In ancient China, flowers were observed not only for beauty, but also for what they suggested about character, season, and harmony. Different flowers came to carry different meanings. Plum blossoms could suggest endurance because they bloomed in the cold. Peonies became associated with wealth, honor, and beauty. Lotus flowers were admired for rising clean from muddy water, which gave them moral and philosophical meaning, as well as visual appeal. Flowers appeared in painting, in gardens, in decorative arts, and in seasonal traditions that tied human life to the rhythms of nature. Other ancient cultures also made flowers part of ritual and remembrance. Archaeologists have found evidence suggesting that flowers were used in burial or ceremonial settings in different places and times. While not every case is fully understood, it is clear that flowers were often present when people wanted to mark something meaningful. They were part of offerings, part of memory, and part of the way people shaped moments that mattered. This may tell us something simple but important. Human beings did not wait for science before understanding that flowers felt significant. They may not have known the biological reason for petals, pollen, or scent, but they understood that flowers stood out from the rest of the landscape. They felt different. They were fleeting, beautiful, and full of quiet presence. That was enough to give them a place in religion, art, storytelling, medicine, and daily life. Flowers were also useful in more practical ways. Some were used in perfumes and oils. Some appeared in herbal traditions. Some were grown in early gardens, where beauty and usefulness often lived side by side. A flower might be admired for its color, but also valued for its scent, its symbolic meaning, or its role in healing practices. In the ancient world, the line between beauty, usefulness, and belief was often much softer than it is today. And that may be one reason flowers fit so easily into early civilization. They could be sacred and ordinary at the same time. They could grow in the wild, but also be brought close to the home or temple. They could mark a feast, a prayer, a burial, or a season. Their meaning was flexible, but their presence remained constant. Even now, many of those old patterns remain. People still bring flowers to important places. They still place them beside the dead. They still use them in weddings, festivals, and ceremonies. Modern life may have changed the setting, but the instinct is still familiar. And yet, all of this human meaning gathered around a real structure with real parts. The flower may have become a symbol in the human mind, but for the plant, it remains something active and practical. Beneath the myths, the offerings, and the beauty, the flower was still doing careful work. So after stepping through the old human world of flowers, it helps to come closer again and look more carefully at the flower itself, piece by piece, to see how such a delicate form is built. When people picture a flower, they often think first of the petals. That makes sense. Petals are usually the most visible part. They are often bright, soft, and arranged in a way that catches the eye right away. But a flower is more than petals alone. If you slow down and look carefully, it begins to feel less like a simple ornament and more like a carefully built structure, with each part playing a role. On the outside of many flowers are the petals. Petals are often colorful, and their main job is usually to attract attention. They help bring pollinators toward the flower by standing out from the green world around them. Their colors can be vivid or pale, bold or subtle. In some flowers, the petals also carry patterns that help guide insects inward, almost like gentle arrows pointing toward nectar and pollen. To human eyes, petals may seem to exist for beauty, but for the plant, that beauty is often part of a signal. Beneath the petals are structures called sepals. Sepals are usually green, though not always, and they often protect the flower while it is still a bud. Before the flower opens, the sepals wrap around the developing parts inside. They act almost like a cover, helping shield the bud as it grows. Once the flower opens, the sepals may remain beneath the petals like a support layer, still easy to miss unless you turn the flower and look from below. Closer to the center are the stamens. The stamens are the male parts of the flower. Each stamen usually has a thin stalk called a filament, topped by an anther. The anther is the part that produces pollen. Pollen may look like simple yellow dust, but it carries an important role. Inside it are the plant's male reproductive cells. When an insect brushes against the anthers, or when wind moves through certain flowers, that pollen can be carried away to another bloom. In the middle of many flowers is the female structure, often called the pistil. Sometimes a flower has one pistil, and sometimes more than one part may be joined together. At the top of the pistil is the stigma. This is the part that receives pollen. It may feel sticky or shaped in a way that helps catch pollen grains. Below the stigma is the style, a narrow stalk-like structure. The style leads down to the ovary, which sits lower in the flower and contains the ovules. The ovules are especially important because after fertilization, they can become seeds. This means that deep inside the flower, in a place we do not usually see unless the flower is opened or studied closely, the next generation of the plant is waiting in possibility. If pollen reaches the stigma and the process succeeds, the flower can begin forming seeds. In many plants, the ovary itself later grows into a fruit. So the flower is not only a bloom, it can also be the beginning of what comes next. Some flowers also contain nectar. Nectar is a sugary liquid that attracts insects, birds, or other animals. It is not a main structural part in the same way petals or stamens are, but it is often an important feature. By offering a food reward, the flower increases the chance that a visitor will come close enough to brush against the pollen and carry it elsewhere. Not every flower looks the same, of course. Some have large open petals. Some have narrow tubes. Some seem simple, while others seem crowded with layers. In certain cultivated flowers, the shapes can be so full and doubled that the inner parts are harder to see. But even with this variety, the same basic plan is often still there. Protective outer parts, attractive visible parts, pollen-making parts, and seed-forming parts, all arranged in one living design. Once you know these pieces, flowers begin to look different. A blossom no longer seems like just a colorful shape on a stem. It becomes something more intentional. You start to notice the center. You notice the symmetry. You notice how each part sits in relation to the others. The flower begins to feel less mysterious in one way, but more impressive in another. And once the parts are visible, a larger question begins to grow. Why is the flower built this way at all? Why this combination of color, protection, pollen, and hidden seed-making structures? The answer leads into one of the biggest changes in the history of plant life, when plants began to solve reproduction in a new and remarkably effective way. There was a time when flowers did not exist. The land was still full of plants. Forests still spread. Green life still reached upward toward light. But the world looked different. There were no roses, no lilies, no orchids, no fields bright with spring color. Plants reproduced in older ways, and for a very long time that was enough. So when flowers finally appeared, they were not just adding beauty to the planet. They were introducing a new way of living and a new way of solving one of life's basic problems. That problem was reproduction. A plant cannot move from place to place. It cannot walk toward a partner or carry its young somewhere safe. It must stay rooted where it grows and still find a way to pass life forward. Long before flowering plants appeared, many plants already had systems for this. Some released pollen into the wind and simply relied on chance. If enough pollen drifted through the air, some of it might reach the right target. This method could work, but it was often wasteful. Huge amounts of pollen might be released, only for most of it to land in the wrong place. Flowers help change that. Instead of depending so heavily on wide, uncertain dispersal, flowering plants began using more targeted methods. They could attract living creatures to carry pollen with far greater precision. An insect or bird moving from one flower to another could do what wind alone often could not. It could bring pollen directly from one member of a species to another. That made reproduction more focused and, in many cases, more efficient. This was a major shift. A flower is not just a reproductive structure, it is also an invitation. Its color, scent, shape, nectar, and timing all help draw attention from the right visitors. Once those visitors arrive, the flower can place pollen onto them in useful ways, and then receive pollen in return from another bloom. The relationship is quiet, but powerful. Instead of casting reproductive material out into open space and hoping, flowering plants began to build partnerships with the living world around them. Another important change was happening deeper inside the plant. In flowering plants, the ovules are enclosed. That means the structures that can become seeds are protected inside the ovary. This is one of the defining traits of angiosperms. In older seed plants, such as gymnosperms, seeds are not enclosed in the same way. Think of the exposed seeds in a pine cone. Flowering plants developed a more sheltered system. That extra protection likely gave advantages during reproduction and seed development. And once fertilization happened, flowers offered another useful possibility. The ovary could develop into fruit. This was another quiet revolution. Fruit helps protect seeds as they develop, but it can also help spread them. Animals may eat the fruit and carry the seeds away. Wind may move lighter fruiting structures. Water may carry others. In many cases, the flower was not only helping the plant reproduce, it was also helping the next generation travel. That gave flowering plants another edge in spreading across landscapes. Over long stretches of time, these advantages added up. More precise pollen transfer, better protection for developing seeds, new ways of spreading offspring across the land. These are not small improvements. They are the kinds of changes that can reshape ecosystems. And that is exactly what flowering plants eventually did. They spread widely, diversified into enormous numbers of species, and became the dominant plant group in many parts of the world. It is easy to forget how successful they became because flowers now feel so normal. They are everywhere in the modern world. They seem like part of the background. But their success was not guaranteed. Flowers were a solution, and a very effective one. They allowed plants to work with insects, birds, and other animals in ways that older plant systems had not. They made the landscape more interactive, more colorful, and more connected. In a sense, flowers changed not only how plants reproduced, but how plants participated in the wider community of life. And yet, this change did not happen overnight. The first flowers were not garden roses blooming in familiar spring sunlight. They appeared much earlier in a stranger world. Their rise was gradual, and the earth they entered was still shared with creatures and landscapes that would feel very distant from our own. So to understand how flowers came to shape the living world so deeply, it helps to step back into that older earth, where the first flowering plants began their long and world-changing story. The first flowers did not bloom in a world that looked like ours. There were no city gardens, no flower shops, no spring parks full of tulips and daffodils. The earth of early flowering plants was older, warmer in many places, and shared with creatures that no longer exist. Dinosaurs still walked the land. Forests spread across broad regions. Insects were already present and active. And somewhere in that ancient world, the first flowering plants began to appear. Scientists believe flowering plants first arose more than 100 million years ago, during the age of dinosaurs. That can be hard to picture. Flowers can feel delicate and modern, almost like a finishing touch added to the natural world. But in truth, they are ancient. They have been part of life on Earth for an incredibly long time. Even so, their earliest history is not perfectly clear. The fossil record is incomplete, and soft plant parts do not always preserve well. So while scientists have learned a great deal, some of the details are still being studied and debated. That mystery has even made the rise of flowering plants famous in science. Charles Darwin once called their sudden appearance in the fossil record an abominable mystery. What troubled him was not that flowers existed, but that they seemed to appear and diversify so quickly in geological terms. Today, scientists understand much more than Darwin did, but the early spread of flowering plants is still one of the most fascinating chapters in plant evolution. The earliest flowers were probably not large or showy. They may have been small, simple, and easy to miss compared with the dramatic garden flowers people know today. But they did not need to look grand to be important. What mattered was that they carried a powerful set of advantages. They could protect their developing seeds inside ovaries. They could attract animal pollinators more directly. They could form fruits. Over time, those advantages allowed flowering plants to spread into more habitats and diversify into more forms. And diversify they did. From those early beginnings, flowering plants slowly expanded across the planet. They moved into forests, wetlands, open ground, riverbanks, dry regions, and mountain slopes. They adapted to different climates, soils, and pollinators. Over millions of years, they gave rise to an astonishing range of forms. Tiny wildflowers, climbing vines, water lilies, grasses, shrubs, towering trees, orchids, cacti, fruit trees, herbs, and meadow flowers all belong to the flowering plant group. That last part may be especially surprising. Grasses are flowering plants. So are oak trees, apple trees, sunflowers, and roses. When people hear the word flower, they often picture something bright and obvious. But in biology, the flowering plant family is much broader than that. Many of the plants humans rely on most, including major food crops, are part of this same great group. Wheat, rice, corn, beans, tomatoes, and countless others are flowering plants. In that sense, the history of flowers is not only the history of beauty in nature, it is also part of the history of human survival. As flowering plants spread, they began to reshape the world around them. They created new food sources for insects and other animals. They changed habitats. They made fruits available to creatures that could then carry seeds to new places. They added new layers of color, scent, and seasonal rhythm to landscapes. Over time, the rise of flowering plants helped build the richer, more interconnected terrestrial world we now know. It is possible that their relationship with insects helped speed this process, as flowers and pollinators influence one another. Each side may have encouraged change in the other. Flowers that better attracted helpful visitors had an advantage. Pollinators that better found and used flowers had an advantage too. This kind of shared change, repeated across long ages, may have helped drive the extraordinary spread and diversity of flowering plants. And yet, for all their success, flowers did not replace everything that came before. Pines, firs, cycads, ferns, and mosses still exist, and many remain important parts of ecosystems today. But flowering plants became the dominant group in most modern land environments. Their rise was one of the great turning points in Earth's biological history. That may be why flowers can feel both ordinary and profound at the same time. They are ordinary because they are everywhere. We grow up around them. We expect them. But they are also the result of a very long evolutionary journey, one that changed the face of the planet and filled it with new forms of life, new partnerships, and new possibilities. And those partnerships matter. Flowers did not rise alone. Their story became deeply tied to the story of the creatures that visited them, fed from them, and carried their pollen. Once those relationships began to deepen, the world of flowers became even more complex and much more alive with exchange. A flower can bloom beautifully all on its own, but beauty is often only part of the story. For many flowering plants, the bloom is meant to be visited. It is meant to catch the attention of something alive, something moving through the world with wings, fur, feathers, or even just a body small enough to slip between petals. This is where flowers become part of a relationship. They are not only structures growing from stems. They are meeting places between plant life and animal life. Pollination is the name for one of the most important parts of that relationship. At the simplest level, pollination happens when pollen is moved from the male part of a flower to the female part. Once that transfer happens in the right way, the plant can continue the process that may lead to seeds. Some plants use wind for this, some use water, but many flowering plants rely on animals to help carry pollen from one bloom to another. These animal helpers are called pollinators. Bees are among the best known, and for good reason. As they move from flower to flower collecting nectar or pollen, their fuzzy bodies easily pick up grains of pollen and carry them onward. But bees are only part of the picture. Butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, hummingbirds, and bats also act as pollinators. In different places and different ecosystems, different flowers depend on different visitors. That diversity helps explain why flowers come in so many forms. A flower that depends on bees may look and behave differently from one that depends on hummingbirds. Bee-pollinated flowers often have shapes that provide landing space and colors. Bees notice well, such as blue, violet, or yellow. Hummingbird flowers are often red, tubular, and rich in nectar. Moth-pollinated flowers may open at night and release strong fragrance into the dark air. Bat-pollinated flowers may be pale, sturdy, and open wide enough for larger nighttime visitors. Over time, flowers and pollinators began shaping one another. This is called coevolution. It means that changes in one living thing can influence changes in another, especially when their lives are closely linked. If a flower with a certain shape is better pollinated by a certain insect, that flower may leave more offspring. If an insect becomes especially good at feeding from a certain kind of flower, it may also do better over time. Across many generations, these small advantages can lead to deeper and deeper specialization. Some of these relationships became remarkably close. There are flowers whose shapes seem almost built for one kind of pollinator. There are pollinators with tongue lengths that match certain floral tubes with surprising precision. In a few cases, a plant may rely very heavily on just one main pollinator species. That kind of closeness can be efficient, but it also creates dependence. If one side of the partnership struggles, the other may struggle too. Even when the relationship is not exclusive, it is still powerful. Flowers offer rewards, most often nectar and pollen. Pollinators come seeking food. While feeding, they help the plant reproduce. It is a quiet trade, repeated millions of times across fields, forests, wetlands, deserts, and gardens. Much of the beauty people see in flowering landscapes is possible because of this exchange happening again and again. And the importance of pollination reaches far beyond wildflowers. Many crops that humans depend on are pollinated by animals. Fruits, nuts, seeds, and many vegetables begin with flowers and require successful pollination to produce well. So the work of pollinators is not only part of natural ecosystems, it is also part of human food systems. The relationship between flowers and pollinators supports both wildlife and human life in ways many people rarely stop to notice. There is also something calming in the way this partnership works. It is not loud. It is not dramatic in the way storms or predators can be. Much of it happens quietly in warm air and daylight. A bee lands, drinks, gathers, lifts off, and moves on. A moth follows scent through the night. A bird hovers for only a moment and then disappears. Yet these small visits help hold entire plant communities together. Once pollinators become part of the picture, many features of flowers start to feel less mysterious. Their bright colors, their drifting fragrance, their shapes and patterns. Even the hour of day they open begins to make more sense. These are not random details. They are signals, invitations, and adjustments shaped over long stretches of time. And perhaps color is the easiest place to see that. Humans notice floral color immediately, but flowers are not colored for human eyes alone. In many cases, their brightness is aimed at other viewers entirely, some of whom see the world very differently from we do. Color is often the first thing people notice about flowers. Even from a distance, a patch of flowers can change the feeling of a whole landscape. A hillside that might otherwise seem quiet and green becomes bright with yellow, blue, white, red, or purple. A single bloom in a crack of pavement can draw the eye more strongly than the stone around it. Flowers seem to know how to stand out, and in a way, that is exactly what they are doing. For a flower, color is often part of being noticed. The bright shades people admire are not simply there for decoration. In many cases, they help attract pollinators. A flower needs to be seen by the right kind of visitor at the right time. If a bee, butterfly, bird, or other pollinator can spot the bloom more easily, the plant has a better chance of moving pollen and producing seeds. So color becomes part of the flower's strategy. Different colors come from different pigments inside plant tissues. Some flowers get red, purple, or blue shades from pigments called anthocyanins. Others get yellow and orange tones from carotenoids. White flowers may reflect light in ways that make them appear bright and clean, without strong pigment at all. The exact color a flower shows depends on chemistry, structure, and sometimes even the conditions in which it grows, such as soil properties or acidity in certain species. But what humans see is only part of the story. Many pollinators do not see flowers the same way we do. Bees, for example, are especially good at seeing blue, violet, and ultraviolet patterns. They do not see red the way humans do, but they can detect details invisible to us. Some flowers have ultraviolet markings on their petals, that act like guides, leading bees toward the center where nectar and pollen can be found. To human eyes, the petals may look plain or simply colorful. To a bee, the same flower may appear marked with glowing pathways. That means a flower can carry two different appearances at once. One is the appearance it offers to us, full of color and beauty. The other is the appearance it offers to pollinators, full of signals and directions. These are not separate designs. They are layered together in the same petals. A flower can be lovely to human eyes while also functioning almost like a landing signal for an insect. Different pollinators are often associated with different color patterns. Bee-pollinated flowers are frequently blue, purple, violet, white, or yellow, colors that bees notice well. Bird-pollinated flowers, especially those visited by hummingbirds, are often red or orange. Since many insects do not detect red as strongly, red flowers may stand out especially well to birds while attracting fewer insect visitors. White or pale flowers are common among plants pollinated at dusk or night, because pale surfaces are easier to see in dim light. Night-blooming flowers may also rely more heavily on fragrance, but color still matters. Flower color can also change over time. In some species, a flower may shift shade as it ages or after it has been pollinated. This can help signal to pollinators which blooms still contain nectar or are still worth visiting. A fresh flower may display one color, while an older or already pollinated one takes on another. In this way, color can become a kind of message, helping reduce wasted visits and making pollination more efficient. Of course, not every bright flower is using color in exactly the same way. Some flowers grow in clusters, making their color easier to notice from far away. Others rely on strong contrast against dark leaves or dry ground. Some use bold central markings, while others use softer blends that still guide the right animals inward. Across the plant world, color is endlessly varied, but the larger purpose often remains the same: to be seen, to be approached, to increase the chance of a successful exchange. And yet color does more than support reproduction. At least from the human side, color also shapes emotion. People connect yellow flowers with cheerfulness, white flowers with peace, red roses with romance, blue flowers with rarity or calm. These meanings are cultural and change from place to place, but they show how strongly floral color enters human feeling. A flower's color may begin as part of biological function, but in human life, it often gathers emotional meaning too. That overlap is part of what makes flowers so compelling. Their beauty is not empty. It is connected to survival. Their colors are not random. They are shaped by chemistry, light, pollinators, and time. And still, for all the importance of sight, flowers do not speak through vision alone. Some flowers call out through the air instead, sending invisible signals that can drift far beyond the reach of petals, and sometimes stay in memory even longer than color ever could. A flower does not need to be seen to be noticed. Sometimes its presence arrives through the air first. Before the eyes find the petals, the nose finds the scent. A garden may seem quiet and still, and yet the air is already carrying messages: sweetness, spice, freshness, heaviness, something soft and powdery, or something sharp and green. Floral scent can seem gentle, but it is one of the most powerful ways a flower reaches out into the world. For the plant, scent is often part of communication. Flowers release tiny airborne chemicals called volatile compounds. These are light enough to drift through the air, sometimes only a short distance, sometimes much farther. Different flowers produce different mixes of these compounds, which is why one flower may smell rich and warm, while another smells bright and clean. The scent is not random. In many cases, it helps the flower attract the right pollinators. That is one reason floral smell can vary so much. A flower pollinated by bees may produce a scent that suits bees. A flower visited by moths may release its fragrance more strongly in the evening or at night, when moths are active. Some bat-pollinated flowers also produce strong odors that travel well after dark. In these cases, scent matters especially because light is weaker. When color is harder to see, smell can take over as the more useful signal. This is why some of the most fragrant flowers become strongest after sunset. Night-blooming jasmine, certain lilies, and other evening flowers often seem to wake up as the light fades. Their scent grows fuller in the dark air because their pollinators are active then. For humans, this can make a summer evening feel magical. But for the flower, it is a very practical moment. It is simply releasing the right message at the right time. Not all floral scent is sweet. This may be surprising at first, since people often think of flowers as naturally pleasant. But some flowers smell strange, heavy, or even terrible to human noses. Certain flowers release odors that resemble rotting meat, damp decay, or waste. These smells are not mistakes. They are signals meant to attract flies or beetles that normally seek out dead material or places to lay eggs. To us, the smell may seem unpleasant. To the right insect, it is useful information. So once again, what humans feel and what flowers are doing are not always the same thing. A flower's scent may feel romantic or peaceful to us, but its true purpose may be to guide an insect toward nectar or pollen. On the other hand, a scent we find disgusting may be highly effective in the flower's own world. Floral fragrance is shaped by evolution, not by human taste. Still, when human taste and floral chemistry happen to meet in a pleasing way, the result can be unforgettable. That may be why scent gives flowers such a strong place in memory. Smell is closely tied to memory and emotion in the human brain. A floral scent can bring back a room, a season, a childhood yard, a grandparent's garden, a funeral, a wedding, a warm night, or a person long gone. It can do this suddenly, before the mind has time to sort out why. A flower's scent drifts into the present, but it can also seem to open the past. This gives fragrance a double life. For the flower, scent is often a biological tool. For us, it can become something much more personal. The same rose may be attracting a pollinator, while also reminding someone of an anniversary years ago. The same lilac may signal nectar to an insect while pulling a person back into an old spring afternoon. Flowers live in the natural world, but they also live quietly inside human memory. There is also great variety in how flowers manage scent. Some produce only a faint smell that can be noticed up close. Others fill an entire space. Some smell strongest when freshly opened. Some change over the course of the day. Temperature can matter too. Warm air often helps scent travel more easily, which is why a flower may seem more fragrant in sunlight or on a mild evening. Humidity, wind, and the age of the flower can all shape what we notice. And just like color, fragrance often works best when paired with other signals. A flower may use bright petals, a clear shape, nectar, and scent all together. It may say, in several different ways at once, "Come here. Notice me. There is something here for you." In that sense, scent is not separate from the flower's design. It is part of the whole invitation. And yet for humans, the invitation can feel emotional as much as biological. A flower's scent can soothe, comfort, and linger in the mind long after the bloom is gone. Perhaps that is why flowers became so closely tied to tenderness, apology, celebration, grief, and love. They do not only offer beauty to the eye, they move through memory in a softer and more invisible way, which may help explain why flowers have so often been trusted to carry human feeling, especially in moments when words are not enough. Few things in nature seem to carry feeling as easily as flowers do. People turn to them in moments that are joyful, painful, hopeful, uncertain, or full of love. A bouquet may be given at the beginning of a relationship. Flowers may appear at a wedding, resting quietly in hands or on tables. They may sit beside a hospital bed. They may be placed at a funeral, where they seem to offer beauty in the middle of grief. Again and again, flowers are invited into the most emotional parts of human life. That is a remarkable role for a plant to have. A flower does not speak. It does not explain anything. And yet people often trust flowers to say what feels hard to say in words. They can express care, admiration, apology, sympathy, gratitude, or remembrance. A single stem can feel gentle. A full bouquet can feel generous. Even when the exact message is not spoken out loud, flowers often seem to carry one. Part of this may come from their temporary nature. Flowers are beautiful, but they do not last. They open, brighten a room or a landscape for a little while, and then they fade. That briefness makes them feel closely tied to time. They remind us that many of the most meaningful things in life are also passing. A spring bloom does not stay forever. A celebration does not stay forever. A life does not stay forever. In that way, flowers can feel both joyful and a little sad at the same time. That combination may be one reason they fit so many human moments. At a wedding, flowers can represent freshness, beauty, and the start of something new. At a funeral, they can represent love, respect, and the tenderness of memory. Given in apology, they can feel softer than speech. Given in celebration, they can add brightness without needing explanation. Flowers do not force emotion. They simply sit beside it. There is also something gentle in the way flowers exist. They are not loud. They do not demand attention through movement or sound. Their presence is quiet. A vase of flowers changes a room without changing its noise. A flower placed on a grave does not interrupt grief, but it somehow keeps company with it. This quietness may be part of why people trust flowers so much in emotional settings. They offer presence without pressure. Scent deepens this effect because smell is tied so closely to memory. Flowers can become linked to very personal emotions, A certain fragrance may remind someone of a parent's garden, a childhood home, a wedding day, or a goodbye. Even years later, the smell of the same flower can bring those feelings back with surprising force. In this way, flowers do not just mark important moments, they can also preserve them in memory. Color plays a role too. Different cultures and traditions connect different flower colors with different feelings. Red may suggest romance or passion. White may suggest peace, innocence, mourning, or respect. Yellow may seem cheerful or warm. Pink may feel soft and affectionate. These meanings are not universal everywhere, but they show how easily human emotion attaches itself to flowers. A color that helps attract a pollinator can also become part of a human language of feeling. Flowers can also hold private meaning, separate from custom. Someone may grow a certain flower because it reminds them of a grandparent. Someone may keep dried flowers in a book because they came from a meaningful day. A person may love a flower not because it symbolizes anything in public culture, but because it belongs to a memory only they understand. This makes flowers feel both shared and personal. Whole societies give them meaning, but individuals do too. Perhaps that is why flowers move so easily between public ritual and private life. They can be part of major ceremonies, but they also belong on windowsills, in gardens, on walks, and in quiet rooms. They can be expensive gifts or simple wild blooms picked by hand. They can mark great events or tiny acts of care. In all these forms, they remain emotionally readable. They seem to meet people where they are, and yet flowers do not become emotional symbols by accident. Part of their power comes from the way they are built. Their symmetry, their softness, their color, their scent, and their brief blooming all shape the way humans respond to them. What feels emotional to us is still grounded in physical form. Flowers stir feeling, but they do so through real structures, carefully arranged by nature. That means emotion is only one side of the story. The same bloom that comforts a person is also guiding insects, offering nectar, displaying color, and managing reproduction. Even beauty that feels deeply personal rests on patterns and designs that serve practical purposes too. The closer we look, the more these two worlds seem to overlap. And one of the clearest places to see that overlap is in the shape of the flower itself, where beauty and function come together, in forms that are far more purposeful than they first appear. A flower's beauty can seem effortless, but its form is often carefully arranged. The curve of a petal, the width of an opening, the depth of a tube, the placement of pollen, even the way a flower faces the light, can all shape what happens when a visitor arrives. What looks graceful to us is often highly structured. A flower is not only trying to be noticed, it is also trying to guide an encounter. One of the clearest patterns in flowers is symmetry. Many flowers have what is called radial symmetry. That means they can be divided into similar parts around a center, almost like a wheel. Daisies, buttercups, and many lilies show this kind of arrangement. A pollinator can approach them from more than one direction and still find its way inward. This can be useful for flowers that welcome many kinds of visitors rather than relying on only one. Other flowers have bilateral symmetry. This means the flower can be divided into matching halves in only one main way. more like a face than a wheel. Snapdragon flowers, pea flowers, and many orchids show this pattern. Bilateral symmetry often encourages a pollinator to approach in a more specific position. That matters because it can control where the animal lands, how it moves, and which body parts brush against pollen or the stigma. Shape matters just as much as symmetry. Some flowers are open and shallow, with broad surfaces that make landing easy. These flowers can often be visited by many different creatures, including bees, flies, beetles, and small butterflies. They are accessible. Their structure does not ask for special equipment. A visitor can walk in, feed, and leave again without much difficulty. Other flowers are more selective. Tubular flowers, for example, suit pollinators with long tongues or long beaks. Hummingbirds can reach into narrow floral tubes for nectar. So can certain moths with long feeding parts. These flowers are not impossible for other creatures to visit, but their shape clearly favors some over others. In that way, form becomes a filter. The flower is not only offering food, it is choosing, in a quiet structural way, who is most likely to take part. Patterns also guide movement. Some flowers have markings called nectar guides. These are visual signals that direct a pollinator toward the center of the flower, where nectar and reproductive parts are located. In some species, humans can see these guides as lines, spots, or color changes. In others, the most important guides appear in ultraviolet patterns that human eyes cannot detect, but bees can. To us, the petal may seem smooth and simple. To a bee, it may look marked with a clear path. The placement of pollen is often just as deliberate. Some flowers are shaped so that when an insect enters, pollen dusts a particular part of its body, perhaps the head, back, or underside. When that same insect enters another flower of the same kind, the pollen is more likely to land exactly where it is needed. This is a quiet kind of precision. The flower does not move in the way an animal moves, but its design helps create the right contact at the right moment. Even the position of a flower can matter. A hanging bell-shaped flower may favor certain visitors. A bloom facing upward may collect warmth or offer a landing platform more easily. A flower cluster may function like many small flowers, gathered into one larger signal, making the plant easier to notice from far away. What seems like style is often arrangement with purpose. This does not mean flowers were consciously designed in the way a person designs a tool. Rather, over very long periods of time, shapes that improve pollination tended to help plants reproduce more successfully. Little by little, structures that worked well became more common. The result is a world of flowers that often seem artistic, but whose beauty is deeply tied to function. And that may be why flowers feel so satisfying to look at. Their shapes are not random. Their patterns are not wasted. Their symmetry has consequence. The same bloom that pleases a human eye may also be guiding a bee, fitting a hummingbird, or placing pollen with astonishing accuracy. Beauty and usefulness are folded together. All of these forms support a simple exchange. The flower offers something valuable, whether nectar, pollen, or scent. The visitor leaves carrying something important in return. That quiet trade happens so often that it can seem ordinary, but much of life on land depends on it. Flowers are not only shapes in the air, They are places where energy, reproduction, and survival meet. For all their softness and beauty, flowers are also places of exchange. A bee lands on a blossom for a reason. A butterfly pauses there for a reason. A hummingbird hovers in front of a flower for only a few seconds. But even that brief visit is part of something larger. The flower is offering something, and the visitor has come to take it. Yet in taking it, the visitor often gives something back. This quiet trade lies at the center of much of the flowering world. One of the most important rewards flowers offer is nectar. Nectar is a sugary liquid produced by many flowers. It is rich in energy, which makes it valuable to animals that need quick fuel. Bees use nectar to help make honey. Butterflies drink it through long feeding tubes. Hummingbirds depend on it to support their fast-moving bodies. Even bats, in some parts of the world, visit flowers for nectar. What seems like a tiny drop of sweetness can matter a great deal to the animal that finds it. Flowers do not make nectar by accident. Nectar is part of attraction. It gives pollinators a reason to come close, return again, and visit many flowers in one outing. A flower that offers a useful reward has a better chance of being visited, and a flower that is visited has a better chance of moving its pollen where it needs to go. Pollen itself is also important. Pollen contains the plant's male reproductive cells, but for some animals, it is more than that. It is also food. Bees in particular gather pollen because it contains protein and other nutrients. They use it to feed their young. So a flower may offer both nectar for energy and pollen for nourishment. This makes it even more valuable as a destination. As pollinators move through flowers, their bodies often brush against the reproductive parts. A bee reaching for nectar may rub against the anthers and pick up pollen on its legs, face, or fuzzy back. When it flies to another flower of the same species, some of that pollen may touch the stigma. If that happens in the right way, pollination can occur. So the pollinator is not trying to help the plant. It is simply trying to feed. But in the process, it becomes part of the flower's reproductive success. This is what makes the relationship so elegant. Neither side is giving something away for nothing. The flower gains a way to move pollen with more precision than wind alone often allows. The animal gains food. Both sides benefit, even though neither one is thinking about the relationship in the human sense. It is simply a system that has worked well enough, for long enough, to become one of the most important patterns in nature. And it happens everywhere. In gardens, meadows, orchards, forests, wetlands, desert blooms after rain, and mountain slopes in summer. This exchange is taking place. It may look small from up close, just one insect visiting one flower. But multiplied across landscapes and seasons, it becomes enormous. Entire plant communities depend on repeated visits like these. So do many animals, and so do humans, even if we do not always notice it. Many of the foods people eat begin with flowers. Fruits, nuts, seeds, and many vegetables depend on successful pollination. Apples begin as blossoms. So do blueberries, pumpkins, almonds, cucumbers, and many more. In that sense, the quiet exchange between flower and pollinator does not only sustain wild landscapes, it also supports farms, gardens, and food systems that people rely on every day. There is something deeply peaceful in the way this happens. A pollinator does not arrive with noise or force. It lands, feeds, brushes against pollen, and moves on. The flower does not chase or grab. It simply waits, offering scent, color, shape, and reward. The exchange is subtle, but its consequences are immense. Seeds may form because of it. Fruit may grow because of it. Another season of life may begin because of it. Of course, not all flowers handle this exchange in the same way. Some are open to many visitors. Others are much more selective. Some offer honest rewards. Others rely on trickery. Some bloom in daylight, while others open only in darkness. Once you begin to look beyond the familiar garden flower, the floral world becomes far stranger and more inventive than it first appears. And that is where the story starts to take an even more curious turn, because not every flower plays by simple, gentle rules. The more closely you look at flowers, the less ordinary they become. At first, a flower can seem simple enough. It opens, it smells pleasant, it attracts a bee, and that seems to be the end of the story. But the flowering world is much wider and stranger than that. Some flowers bloom only at night. Some mimic insects. Some smell like decay. Some trap their visitors for a little while. And some depend so closely on one kind of pollinator that their whole future seems tied to a single relationship. One of the strangest things flowers can do is imitate life. Certain orchids, for example, have evolved flowers that resemble female insects in shape, color, or even scent. A male insect may approach, thinking the flower is a mate. In the confusion of that encounter, pollen sticks to the insect's body. When it visits another flower of the same kind, pollination can happen. To human eyes, this may seem almost unbelievable. But over long stretches of time, imitation that worked well was favored again and again. Other flowers use a very different strategy. Instead of smelling sweet, they smell awful. Some release odors that resemble rotting flesh, dung, or damp decay. These scents attract flies and beetles that normally search for dead material or places to lay eggs. To us, such flowers may seem unpleasant or even shocking. But from the flower's point of view, the scent is doing exactly what it needs to do. It is calling in the right visitors. This reminds us of something important. Flowers are not trying to please humans. Their colors, scents, and shapes are shaped by what helps them reproduce. Sometimes that happens to match our idea of beauty. Other times it does not. A flower that smells like death may be just as successful as one that smells like perfume, so long as it attracts the creatures it depends on. Some flowers are timed for darkness rather than daylight. Night-blooming flowers often open in the evening or after sunset, when moths or bats begin to move. These flowers are often pale in color, which makes them easier to see in dim light. Many also release strong fragrance at night, helping scent take over where color becomes less visible. A moonlit flower opening in darkness may seem romantic to us, but it is also following a practical schedule, meeting its pollinators when they are active. Some flowers go even further by controlling the movement of their visitors. There are flowers that temporarily trap insects inside. This may sound harsh, but the trap is often brief and carefully timed. The insect enters, brushes against the flower's inner parts, and remains inside until the flower is ready to release it. By the time it leaves, it may be carrying pollen that can be delivered to another bloom. In this way, the flower turns the visit into a more reliable exchange. Other flowers become highly specialized in quieter ways. A long floral tube may favor only insects with very long mouthparts. A certain scent may attract only one group of pollinators. A flower may bloom at a precise time of year that matches the life cycle of the creatures it depends on. These tight relationships can be highly effective. When the right pollinator arrives, the flower's design works beautifully. But specialization also brings risk. A flower that depends on many kinds of visitors has more backup if one disappears. A flower that depends heavily on one pollinator may be more vulnerable. If the pollinator declines, the flower may struggle too. In this way, specialization can be both a strength and a weakness. It shows how refined evolution can become, but also how fragile close relationships in nature can be. All of this makes the floral world feel more inventive than it first appears. Flowers do not all follow one simple plan. Some reward honestly, some deceive. Some invite many visitors. Some work best with just one. Some bloom in sunlight. Some open only into darkness. Beneath the peaceful surface of a flower lies a remarkable range of strategies, each shaped by time, opportunity, and survival. And as humans watched this wide variety of blooms, they did what humans so often do. They began giving them meanings of their own, turning flowers into symbols of love, grief, purity, hope, remembrance, and countless other feelings. People have long treated flowers as if they could speak. Not with voices, of course, but with color, type, season, and shared meaning. A flower could be offered as love, respect, sorrow, apology, hope, or remembrance. Over time, many cultures built their own emotional language around flowers, and that language became so familiar that people often understood the message without needing it explained. Part of this came naturally from the way flowers already felt. A rose, with its softness and fragrance, easily became tied to romance in many traditions. A white lily, bright and still, came to suggest purity, peace, or mourning depending on the setting. Spring blossoms could suggest youth, renewal, or fresh beginnings. Flowers that faded quickly could represent beauty that does not last, or the passing nature of life itself. In this way, the physical qualities of flowers often helped shape the meanings people attached to them. But these meanings were never exactly the same everywhere. Different cultures gave different flowers different roles. In one place, a white flower might suggest innocence. In another, it might be tied more closely to grief or respect for the dead. A red flower could mean love, but it could also suggest strength, celebration, or spiritual importance, depending on tradition. Flower symbolism was never one single system shared by all people. It changed with time, place, religion, custom, and even local plant life. Still, the pattern is clear. Again and again, humans looked at flowers and saw more than petals. They saw feeling. They saw stories. They saw a way to express something gently, using the natural world as a kind of emotional mirror. In some places and periods, this symbolism became especially detailed. During the 19th century, for example, the idea of a language of flowers, sometimes called florography, became very popular in parts of Europe and North America. In that tradition, people linked specific flowers with specific messages. A bouquet could be arranged almost like a coded note. One flower might suggest affection, another remembrance, another loyalty, another rejection. Some meanings were widely shared, while others changed between books and traditions. Even so, the larger idea remained the same. Flowers could communicate where direct words felt difficult, improper, or simply less elegant. That may be part of why flowers fit so well into human relationships. They soften expression. They make strong feelings feel gentler. They allow people to say something important without speaking too loudly. A gift of flowers can feel sincere even when simple. A flower laid in memory can feel respectful without needing explanation. Their symbolism makes them useful, but their beauty keeps them from feeling dry or formal. They remain alive even while carrying meaning. Color deepens that language. Red flowers often became tied to passion or love. White flowers often suggested peace, innocence, or mourning. Yellow could feel cheerful, warm, or full of friendship. Pink might suggest affection or tenderness. Purple could seem noble, spiritual, or mysterious. These associations are not fixed rules, but they show how easily flower color blends into human emotion. A flower's biological signal becomes a human symbol. And yet, symbolism is not only public, it can also be private. A certain flower may mean little in a general cultural sense, but everything to one person. It may remind them of a grandmother's garden, a childhood home, a wedding day, or the walk they took with someone they loved. In those cases, the flower's meaning is not found in a book or a tradition. It lives in memory. This gives flowers a special kind of flexibility. They can carry shared meaning and personal meaning at the same time. That may be why they remain so powerful. A flower can belong to a culture, but it can also belong to one heart. It can be part of public ceremony and private memory all at once. Few objects move so easily between those worlds. They remain small, silent, and temporary, yet they gather enormous emotional weight. And even while humans were building this language around flowers, the flowers themselves were continuing their own work, blooming, receiving pollen, and changing shape as their brief season passed. Because once a flower has been visited, and once its purpose has been fulfilled, another transformation begins, one quieter than the bloom itself, but just as important. A flower at full bloom can seem like the finished form of the plant. The petals are open, the color is bright, the scent is in the air. In that moment, it is easy to think of the flower as the final goal, but for the plant, the bloom is often only the middle of the story. Once pollination has taken place, the flower begins to change. What looked complete was really a passage into something else. The first step happens when pollen reaches the stigma. The stigma is the part of the flower that receives pollen. If the pollen comes from the right kind of flower, and if conditions are right, the process can continue. The pollen grain does not simply sit there. It begins to grow a tiny tube downward through the style, moving toward the ovary below. This is one of the hidden parts of floral life. From the outside, the flower may still look calm and still, but inside, something important is happening. The pollen tube carries the male reproductive cells toward the ovule. Deep in the ovary, fertilization can take place. When that happens, the ovule begins the process of becoming a seed. A seed is a remarkable thing. It contains the early form of a new plant, along with stored food to help that young plant begin growing later on. In a sense, the flower has now done what it was built to do. Its color, scent, shape, and nectar helped attract a visitor. Pollen was transferred. Fertilization happened. And now the next generation is beginning in quiet, hidden form. As this happens, the flower itself often starts to change. The petals, which once played such a visible role, are no longer as necessary. They may wilt, dry, or fall away. Their job was to attract attention, and that stage has passed. The flower can begin to look less vivid now, but this does not mean it has failed. In many cases, the fading of the petals is a sign that the most important step has already occurred. The ovary, meanwhile, may begin to swell. In many flowering plants, the ovary develops into a fruit. This is true whether the fruit is something sweet and familiar, like an apple, peach, or berry, or something less often thought of as fruit, such as a bean pod, cucumber, tomato, or pepper. In everyday language, people do not always think of all these things in the same category. But biologically, many of them begin as the mature ovaries of flowers. This means that fruit is deeply tied to the story of flowers. A flower is not separate from the apple on a branch or the tomato in a garden. The fruit is what the flower becomes after successful reproduction. Inside the fruit are the seeds, protected as they develop. In many plants, the fruit also helps those seeds travel. Animals may eat the fruit and carry the seeds elsewhere. Some fruits dry out and split open. Others are carried by water or fall close to the parent plant. So the flower does two important things in sequence. First, it helps make reproduction possible. Then, through the structures that remain, it helps prepare the next generation for life beyond the bloom. The bright flower that caught the eye gives way to something quieter, but no less important. There is something peaceful in this transformation. A flower does not stay in its most beautiful stage forever, and it does not need to. Its beauty is part of a process. The fading petals are not a loss in the plant's life, but a movement forward. The blossom opens, invites, receives, and then changes into a form that can carry life onward. What was brief on the outside becomes lasting on the inside. This also helps explain why flowering plants have been so successful. They do not only attract pollinators, they also protect developing seeds and often package them inside fruit, giving the next generation a better chance. The flower may seem temporary, but what follows from it can shape entire landscapes. And that whole process depends on timing. Flowers do not bloom whenever they please. They open according to light, warmth, moisture, and season. Some bloom in early spring, some in high summer, some after rain, some only at night. The life of a flower is always tied to a larger rhythm, and that rhythm reaches far beyond any one bloom. No flower blooms all the time. Even the most familiar garden plants live by a schedule. Some appear in the first cool light of spring. Some wait for the warmth of summer. Some bloom late, when the air begins to dry and the year starts leaning toward autumn. Others open only at night, or only after rain, or only when very specific conditions have been met. A landscape full of flowers is also a landscape full of timing. Much of that timing is shaped by light. Plants are highly sensitive to the length of day and night. This helps them tell what season it is, even without a calendar. As the days grow longer or shorter, many plants begin internal changes that prepare them to bloom. This is one reason flowers often open at roughly the same time each year. They are responding to patterns of light that return again and again. Temperature matters too. A plant may need a certain amount of warmth before it can bloom. Some need a period of cold first, almost as if winter itself is part of the signal. Only after that cold season passes are they ready to open. This helps prevent plants from blooming too early during a brief warm spell. It ties flowering to the deeper rhythm of the year. This is especially clear in spring flowers. Many early spring blooms appear when the ground is only just warming and trees are still mostly bare. In forests, this gives them a brief but important chance to gather sunlight before the canopy fills in with leaves. These flowers live in a narrow window. They rise, bloom, and begin to fade before the shade above them becomes too thick. Their beauty is tied to quickness. Summer flowers follow a different pattern. With longer days, warmer temperatures, and many pollinators active, summer can be a rich season for blooming. Meadows, gardens, roadsides, and wetlands may all seem fuller at this time of year. These flowers often take advantage of strong sunlight and frequent insect activity. Their season may last longer than spring blooms, but they still live within limits set by heat, rainfall, and the length of the days. Some flowers belong to later parts of the year. Autumn flowers can bring color when many other blooms are fading. They may support pollinators that are still active late in the season. In dry places, some flowers wait for rain rather than a particular month. In fire-prone landscapes, certain plants may even bloom especially well after fire has cleared the ground and returned nutrients to the soil. So while seasons are important, flowers are really responding to conditions, and those conditions can vary greatly from place to place. Time of day also plays a role. Some flowers open in the morning and close later on. Some remain open for longer stretches. Some wait until evening or night, matching their bloom to the habits of moths, bats, or cooler air. A flower is not only part of a yearly cycle, it may also follow a daily one, opening and closing in step with light, temperature, and the movement of pollinators. All of this shows that blooming is not random. It is carefully timed. A flower that opens too early may miss its pollinators. A flower that opens too late may lose its chance. A plant has to match itself not only to weather and sunlight, but also to the living world around it. This makes flowering one of the clearest examples of how closely plants are tied to the rhythms of their environment. And those rhythms can be disrupted. As climates shift, bloom times can shift too. Some plants are flowering earlier than they once did. In some places, this can create a mismatch between flowers and the insects or birds that depend on them. If a flower opens before its pollinators are active, or if pollinators arrive when blooms are already fading, the relationship becomes less reliable. A small change in timing can ripple outward through the system. Still, when the balance holds, the result is one of the quiet wonders of the year. Fields brighten, trees blossom, vines open, Night flowers release fragrance into darkness. Each bloom appears in its own time, following signals older than human memory. The seasons move and flowers answer. And they do not answer in only one kind of place. Their timing unfolds across forests, mountains, deserts, meadows, wetlands, and coasts, where each landscape shapes floral life in its own way. A flower in a garden is only one version of floral life. Beyond gardens, flowers live in an astonishing range of places. They grow in deserts where rain is rare, in forests where light can be limited, in cold mountain air, in wet meadows, along riverbanks, and in marshy ground where the soil stays soft and full of water. The familiar garden bloom is only a small part of the larger floral world. Out in the wild, flowers are shaped not by neat borders and careful watering, but by wind, soil, insects, elevation, heat, cold, and the long demands of place. That is what makes wildflowers so interesting. They are not simply flowers growing outside human control. They are flowers adapted to the specific conditions around them. Every landscape asks something different of a plant. A dry slope asks for water-saving strategies. A forest floor asks for patience and timing. A windy mountain asks for toughness and low growth. A wetland asks for tolerance of soaked ground. Wildflowers answer these challenges in countless ways. In deserts, flowers often live by waiting. For long stretches of time, the landscape may seem harsh and nearly empty of bloom. Then rain comes, sometimes suddenly, and the desert changes. Seeds that have waited quietly in the soil begin to grow. Flowers may bloom quickly, take advantage of the brief moisture, and set seed before the ground dries again. Their beauty is often short-lived, but that shortness is part of the strategy. In a place where water cannot be trusted, speed becomes a form of survival. Forest flowers follow a different rhythm. On a woodland floor, sunlight can be scarce once the trees above fill with leaves. So many forest wildflowers bloom early in spring, before the canopy closes overhead. For a few precious weeks, they receive enough light to grow, flower, and begin the work of seed-making. Then, as shade deepens, they fade back. Their season is brief, but perfectly timed. This is why early spring woods can feel so special. The blooms are not only beautiful, they are making use of a narrow window in the year. In high mountains, flowers face another kind of challenge. Cold temperatures, thin air, and strong winds make life difficult. Alpine flowers often grow low to the ground, where conditions are slightly more protected. Staying close to the earth helps them resist the force of wind and hold on to warmth. Their blooms may be small, but they can still be vivid against stone and grass. In such places, a single flower can seem especially precious because it is thriving where life is not easy. Wetlands and meadows offer yet another floral world. These places can hold great richness. Wildflowers in meadows often bloom in waves through the warmer months, creating changing patterns of color as the season moves forward. Wetlands support plants adapted to damp or flooded soil, and their flowers can feed large numbers of insects and other animals. In both meadows and wetlands, flowers help support bursts of seasonal biodiversity. They bring in bees, butterflies, flies, beetles, birds, and all the other life that gathers around nectar, pollen, shelter, and seed. What ties all of these places together is adaptation. Wildflowers do not all share one ideal environment. Instead, they match themselves to local conditions. Soil type matters. Moisture matters. Wind matters. Temperature matters. So does the presence of the right pollinators. A flower growing in one landscape may fail in another, not because it is weak, but because it belongs to a different set of rhythms and relationships. This is part of what makes wildflowers feel so closely connected to place. A desert bloom feels like a desert bloom. A woodland trillium feels at home in shade. A mountain flower looks right against rock and cold sky. These flowers do not seem interchangeable. They seem rooted not only in the ground, but in the character of the land itself. And for a long time, humans mostly met flowers this way, as part of wild landscapes, seasonal beauty, and natural patterns already in motion. But over time, people began bringing flowers closer. They planted them near homes. They selected the ones they liked most. They changed their size, color, shape, and fragrance. Little by little, flowers entered another world too, the cultivated world of gardens, breeding, and human preference. A wildflower grows according to the long history of its landscape. A garden flower often carries a second history as well. It still belongs to nature, of course, but it has also been shaped by human attention. People noticed certain blooms, preferred certain colors, favored certain scents, and kept choosing the flowers they found most beautiful, useful, or striking. Over many generations, those choices began to change the flowers themselves. This is one of the quiet ways humans have reshaped the plant world. A person may plant a flower simply because they like how it looks. But when people repeatedly save seeds from the largest bloom, or grow the most fragrant plant, or breed together flowers with unusual colors, they begin guiding the future of that species. This is called selection. It is slower and gentler than the dramatic changes people sometimes imagine, but over time, it can have a powerful effect. That is why many garden flowers look quite different from their wild ancestors. A wild rose, for example, is often much simpler than the full, layered roses found in gardens and flower shops. Wild flowers may have fewer petals, smaller blooms, and more modest colors. Cultivated forms may be larger, brighter, more crowded with petals, or designed to bloom longer. The same is true for many other flowers. Human preference has helped shape tulips, lilies, chrysanthemums, orchids, dahlias, and countless more. Sometimes the change is about size. People often favor larger, fuller blooms because they are more dramatic to look at. Sometimes the change is about color. Unusual shades or patterns may be prized and bred again. Sometimes fragrance matters most. In other cases, people select flowers that bloom repeatedly, stay fresh longer after being cut, or grow well in a certain climate. A garden flower is not only surviving in the world, it is also responding to what humans choose to keep. This process has been going on for centuries. In many cultures, flowers became important parts of domestic life and public beauty. They were planted in courtyards, around temples, in royal gardens, in monastery grounds, and later in parks and home gardens. Over time, gardening became both practical and artistic. Flowers were arranged not just for survival, but for pleasure, meaning, and design. Tulips offer one famous example. Though tulips began as wildflowers, they became objects of intense human admiration and trade, especially in parts of Europe. People valued different colors and patterns, and cultivated forms became highly prized. Roses followed their own long path of cultivation, shaped by centuries of breeding for beauty, scent, and symbolism. Orchids, too, came to fascinate growers because of their unusual forms and enormous variety. In this way, gardens became places where human taste met plant possibility. A flower could be shaped by climate and pollinators, but also by fashion, culture, and desire. Some people wanted orderly beds of color. Others wanted rare flowers from distant places. Some prized fragrance above all. Others valued size or novelty. Across time, these desires helped produce the great variety of ornamental flowers people know today. And yet cultivation can change more than appearance. Sometimes a flower bred mainly for beauty becomes less useful to pollinators. A heavily doubled flower, for example, may have so many petals that nectar and pollen are harder for insects to reach. In other cases, cultivated flowers still provide good resources for bees, butterflies, and other visitors. So the garden can either support ecological life or drift away from it, depending on what is planted and how. That makes the garden an interesting meeting place. It is not fully wild, but not separate from nature either. Bees still visit. Seasons still matter. Soil, sunlight, and rain still shape what grows. Even the most carefully designed flower bed remains tied to the larger natural world. It is a human-made space, but one that still depends on living rhythms older than any garden wall. Perhaps that is part of why gardens feel so peaceful. They bring flowers close. They let people live beside bloom, scent, and seasonal change. They make beauty more regular, more chosen, more intimate. A person may not be able to carry an entire meadow home, but they can plant a few flowers near the door and watch them open day by day. And once flowers entered that closer human world, they moved even more deeply into art, decoration, and imagination, becoming not only living plants in gardens, but lasting images in poetry, painting, and design. Again and again, human beings have felt the need to preserve flowers, not only by planting them in gardens, but by painting them, carving them, writing about them, weaving them into fabric, printing them on paper, and building them into design. A flower blooms for a short time, yet people have spent centuries trying to hold on to its image. That alone says something important. Flowers do not only live in fields and forests, they also live in the human imagination. Part of this comes from how naturally flowers lend themselves to art. They have color, symmetry, softness, contrast, and endless variation. A single bloom can be simple or intricate. A cluster of flowers can feel rich and overflowing. Even dried flowers can remain visually interesting, with curled petals and faded tones that suggest time passing. Artists have long been drawn to these qualities because flowers offer both detail and mood at once. In painting, flowers have appeared across many cultures and centuries. They have been painted as symbols of wealth, love, purity, power, mortality, devotion, and seasonal beauty. In some works, flowers are the main subject. In others, they sit quietly in the background, adding meaning without demanding it directly. Still, life paintings often made special use of flowers because they allowed artists to explore color, texture, light, and shadow. At the same time, a vase of flowers could quietly suggest something deeper, beauty that does not last. That idea appears often in art. A flower opens, reaches its fullest beauty, and then fades. Because of that, flowers became natural symbols of impermanence. They could represent youth, passing time, the fragility of life, or the shortness of pleasure. A painting of flowers might seem calm and decorative at first glance, yet it could also carry a quiet reminder that all living things change. This gave flower imagery a special emotional depth. Poetry found the same richness. Writers have long used flowers to speak about love, spring, innocence, grief, memory, longing, and the movement of time. A blossom might stand for a young life just beginning. A fallen petal might suggest loss. A field of flowers might represent abundance, peace, or the passing beauty of a season. Because flowers are familiar to nearly everyone, they became easy to recognize and deeply flexible as poetic images. And flowers were not only used as symbols. Sometimes poets and artists simply seemed delighted by them. They noticed the shape of a rose, the brightness of a poppy, the fragility of a cherry blossom, the heaviness of a peony, or the quiet star-like form of a daisy. Flowers gave artists a chance to look closely at the natural world and share that attention with others. In this way, flower art can feel symbolic, but it can also feel observational, almost like a form of care. Flowers also became central to decorative design. They appear in wallpaper, pottery, embroidery, stained glass, architecture, jewelry, and textiles from many places and periods. Floral patterns soften objects and spaces. They make things feel alive, seasonal, graceful, or rich. Even when the design is stylized and no longer looks like one exact species, the influence is clear. Human beings have repeatedly turned to floral forms when they want to add beauty to everyday life. There is also an important meeting point between art and science here. Botanical illustration, for example, was not only beautiful, it was useful. Artists carefully recorded flower structures, colors, and forms so that plants could be studied, compared, and identified. These illustrations help people understand the natural world while also showing its elegance. In them, science and beauty were not separate. They worked together. This may be one reason flowers remain such lasting artistic subjects. They give the eye something lovely to rest on, but they also carry meaning easily. They can be cheerful or sorrowful, delicate or bold, simple or luxurious. They can decorate a room, suggest a feeling, or remind a viewer that beauty is often brief. Few natural forms offer so much at once. And yet flowers are more than symbols and images. They are still active parts of living systems, feeding pollinators, supporting seeds, and helping hold ecosystems together. Their place in art may make them seem almost separate from practical life, but in the natural world, their importance remains immediate and real. A field of flowers can seem peaceful in a very simple way. From a distance, it may look like color, softness, and quiet movement in the wind. But beneath that calm appearance, a great deal is happening. Flowers are not only beautiful parts of the landscape, they are working parts of living systems. They feed animals, support reproduction, shape habitats, and help hold together networks of life that extend far beyond the bloom itself. One of their most important roles is feeding pollinators. Flowers provide nectar and pollen to bees, butterflies, moths, beetles, flies, hummingbirds, bats, and many other creatures. For some animals, these floral resources are only part of the diet. For others, they are essential. Nectar offers quick energy. Pollen offers nutrients, especially for insects like bees that use it to feed their young. Without flowers, many of these animals would struggle to survive. And the relationship does not stop there. Pollinators help plants reproduce, which means flowers support not only the lives of the animals that visit them, but also the continuation of plant communities themselves. A healthy flowering landscape can produce seeds, fruit, and future generations of plants. Those plants then provide food, shelter, nesting places, shade, and structure for many other forms of life. So flowers are connected to much more than one simple exchange. They help keep entire systems moving. This matters in wild ecosystems and in human life. Many crops depend on pollination. When flowers are successfully pollinated, orchards fruit, berry bushes produce, and many vegetables develop properly. This means that healthy flowering systems help support food webs in the wild and food supplies for people too. The beauty of flowers can make them seem optional, but their ecological role is anything but optional. Flower diversity also matters. A landscape with many kinds of flowering plants can support more kinds of insects and other animals. Different flowers bloom at different times, offer different shapes, and suit different pollinators. Some open in spring, some in summer, some later still. This staggered blooming helps provide a more reliable supply of food through the seasons. In that way, diversity in flowers helps create stability in the wider ecosystem. A meadow full of many species is doing something important. It is not only producing color, it is supporting many small relationships at once. One bee may depend on one group of flowers. A butterfly may depend on another. Beetles, flies, birds, and other animals all enter the picture too. What looks like a simple patch of wildflowers may actually be a dense web of timing, feeding, and reproduction, all held together through repeated seasonal patterns. Flowers can also tell us something about ecosystem health. When flowering plants disappear from a landscape, the loss often does not stay limited to plants alone. Pollinators may decline. Animals that feed on those pollinators may be affected too. Seed production may fall. Habitat quality may change. In this sense, flowers can act like quiet signs of balance. Their presence often reflects a system that still has enough soil quality, water, seasonal rhythm, and living relationships to support complexity. This is one reason roadsides, meadows, wetlands, and gardens planted with flowering species can matter more than they first seem. They can become feeding grounds, resting places, and small pockets of support in a world where natural habitats are often broken apart. A patch of flowers may seem minor to human eyes, but to an insect or bird, it can be part of survival. Small spaces, when filled with the right plants, can still carry ecological value. There is something comforting in that thought. Flowers may seem delicate, but they participate in strong systems. Their petals may look temporary, but the work they support reaches far outward. They feed motion. They support renewal. They help landscapes remain alive in ways that are easy to miss if we only see them as decoration. And when those flowering patterns begin to thin, shift, or disappear, the change can mean more than the loss of beauty. It can mean that deeper relationships are being strained. The bloom may be small, but what depends on it is not. And that is part of why flowers, for all their softness, can also become quiet signs of a changing world. Flowers can feel timeless. Each year they return. Spring begins to brighten, summer settles in, and somewhere petals open again. Because of that rhythm, it is easy to imagine flowers as permanent, as if they will always be there in the same way, arriving on schedule, filling gardens and meadows, appearing beside roads and under trees, just as they always have. But the world around them is changing, and flowers are changing with it. Some of those changes are easy to miss at first. A plant may bloom a little earlier than it once did. A pollinator may arrive at a slightly different time. A patch of wildflowers may seem thinner than it used to. A familiar roadside may be cut too often to bloom fully. A wet place may dry out. A hot season may last longer. None of these changes has to be dramatic on its own to matter. In living systems, even small shifts can ripple outward. Climate change is one reason for this. As temperatures rise and seasonal patterns become less predictable in some places, flowers may respond by blooming earlier, later, or for different lengths of time. Some plants may do fairly well under new conditions. Others may struggle. A species adapted to a narrow window of cold, moisture, or light may find that its old rhythm no longer matches the world around it. This matters partly because flowers do not live alone. Their lives are tied to pollinators, soil, water, and surrounding plant communities. If a flower blooms before its pollinators are active, fewer visits may happen. If pollinators emerge and the flowers they depend on are not ready yet, the animals may struggle too. When timing slips out of sync, the problem does not stay in one place. It moves through the relationship. Habitat loss is another pressure. Wildflowers need space, and not just any space. They need the right soil, the right moisture, the right amount of disturbance or stability, and the right community of living things around them. When meadows are paved, wetlands drained, forests cleared, or roadside blooms repeatedly cut before they seed, flowers lose more than ground. They lose the conditions that allow them to live as part of a system. Pollinators face pressures as well. Pesticides, habitat fragmentation, disease, and changes in climate can all affect bees, butterflies, moths, and other animals that flowers depend on. When pollinators decline, many plants feel the consequences. When flowers decline, pollinators do too. The relationship works beautifully when both sides remain healthy. It becomes fragile when either side weakens. And yet, this is not only a story of loss, it is also a story of attention. People can protect wildflower meadows. They can plant native flowers that support local pollinators. They can leave space for seasonal blooming. They can care about wetlands, forests, and uncultivated edges where floral life still unfolds quietly. They can notice that a flower is not just decoration, but part of a living network. Sometimes care begins with something very simple: choosing not to look away. That may be one reason flowers still matter so deeply. They connect people to the living world in a direct and gentle way. Not everyone studies ecosystems. Not everyone watches pollinators closely, but almost everyone has felt something in the presence of flowers. They bring beauty into view, but they also reveal dependence, timing, and change. A bloom can be a pleasure, a memory, a warning, and a small act of hope all at once. Flowers matter scientifically because they support reproduction, biodiversity, and food systems. They matter ecologically because they feed pollinators and help hold landscapes together. They matter emotionally because they accompany love, grief, celebration, memory, and care. And perhaps they matter most because they join these worlds instead of staying in only one. They are practical structures shaped by evolution, but they never feel cold. They are brief, but they are never trivial. They are soft, but they are deeply woven into the strength of life on land. So after all this, flowers may seem even more remarkable than they did at the beginning. Not less mysterious, but mysterious in a fuller way. A flower is a signal and a shelter, a lure and a promise, a meeting place between plant and pollinator, between season and soil, between beauty and survival. It opens for a little while, does its work quietly, and then gives way to seed, fruit, memory, and return. And maybe that is why people have always paused for flowers. Because in something so small and temporary, the world has hidden an astonishing amount of life.